Welcome to my interpersonal communications project for Liberty's HSER 508. I'm Kurt Giese, and from this presentation you'll become more knowledgeable of who I am as a person. Let's move to the next slide, which is the agenda. This is the agenda, standard from the course requirements. We'll talk about who I am and the other items on this agenda. Let's move a little bit more and find out who I am. The background. God's at the center of my life. As you can see, Christ is my Savior and He's my rock. I love people and I believe less is more. My life centers around four areas: husband, leader, soldier, and friend. I'm a husband who cares for my family. Of course, I love being a soldier and I'm charged with leading America's sons and daughters. What a privilege. I'm a friend to many. Now let's take a little bit more in depth of who I am. Next slide, please. Before we discuss my purpose, I'd like you to know a little bit more about me, as this view shapes how I communicate with others. I was born in Missoula, Montana. I had loving parents. Life was simple and enjoyable. At an early age, I felt God's presence, and since then I feel His love and touch daily. At the age of 17, I began my Army career as an enlisted soldier, but along the way, my superior, saw something in me, and I was selected to become an officer. These events shape who I am and how I think. Behind every good man is a great woman. For me, that's my lovely wife, Patricia. After military service, I plan on entering the counseling field, where my desire is to serve soldiers and their families. So what exactly is my overarching goal in life? Please go to the next slide for a description. I believe people struggle to find this purpose. I too have struggled with the overarching goal. From this course, though, it's become a little bit more solid. My purpose is to become a servant. I've decided to make Mark 9:3-5 my purpose statement. This is going to allow me to visualize what I want to be in life, which is a servant. As a servant to God first, family second, others third, and myself last. I like what Joel Marcus, a professor at Duke Divinity, said when he talked about servanthood. He described it as a path to greatness, and that Jesus gives us instructions on how to achieve it. However, to do this, I must be an effective communicator. Communication starts with enlarging the conversation. I like that topic during our studies. So what exactly is enlarging the conversation? Let's go to the next slide and we'll talk about it. These are the three components to me of what it means to enlarge the conversation. I like what Burley Allen had to say about this when they were talking about empathetic listening. They said, at this level, listeners refrain from judging the talker and place themselves in others' positions. To me, this gets to the heart of enlarging the conversation. By listening at level 1, I can learn others' points of view, live life for all it's worth at this particular moment, and open paths in the conversation not yet explored. Second component is what I'm calling navigating through the different styles of listening. Burley Allen, in an attempt to describe the categories of listener, provides us 5 options. They're listed on the chart there in the middle. To enlarge the conversation, we as listeners must understand the nuances and subtleties of each of these. I suggest that when we avoid these traps, the 5 listed, we enlarge the conversation. Those interested in enlarging the conversation listen with interest. They focus on the listener rather than depend on them. Avoid interrupting and being preoccupied with what's going on in our hearts and minds. The final component is taking time to do what Stuart talked about, inhale and exhale. To me, these two concepts enlarge the conversation by listening and focusing on the wholeness of the conversation. In the next slide, I'll describe how God has made me and some insight into my behavior blend. Next slide, please. This is my behavior blend. The uniquely you report determined that I'm a CS. My blends are the same in public and both in private. This blend is often seen as passive, reserved, task-oriented, and I'm often seen as a great friend who's not too bossy. On the chart you can see in the green and the red a comparison between the positive and negative ways my behavior blend influences my conversations. On the positive side, I communicate consistently and I generally respond in similar ways. I'm comfortable with who I am, both in public and private. I speak clearly and try to listen at level 1. On the negative side, I'm often seen as inflexible and slow to change. Some even see me as not willing to adapt. As I mentioned earlier, due to my background in the military, in life, I tend to simplify. Sometimes this stops conversations before they start, especially when I'm discussing a complex item with a supervisor. There's a relationship between the behavior blend and interpersonal communications, and I can utilize what we know about myself to enlarge the conversation. That means every communication event encounter with someone is important, a chance to develop relationships and enrich our lives. Let's move to the next slide for discussion on barriers to communication. Barriers. Although my aim is to serve others, there are barriers that impede my goals. First, I often do what Burley Allen defines as hearing what I want to hear. In short, I often filter information based on past experiences. I assume that my military experiences match other experiences. Another barrier I often encounter is physical fatigue. Not so much that my life is so busy that I don't give myself a break, but stress and anxiety manifest themselves in a physical way. To overcome this, I plan on relaxing more, exercising, and taking frequent breaks. Another barrier that keeps me from serving others is that I often feel the need to control. I want to do this to avoid uncertainty in my profession. According to Harold Barrett, an example of this is, quote, an individualistic, iron-handed executive who seems unable to delegate authorities to others, unquote. To me, this describes me at certain times in my military profession. To mitigate this, I plan on delegating, training myself to disengage, and listening to others who are stakeholders in the outcome. These are not the only barriers or obstacles I face. Let's move to the next slide for discussion of internal noise pollutants. These are my internal noise pollutants, and they also can prevent me from communicating effectively. To Burley Allen, there are three primary internal distractions: daydreaming, mental tangents, and rebuttals, all of which I face during my day. I allow these three distractions to be my conversations. Within my relationships with my family, I often daydream. To mitigate this, I plan on making more eye contact and positioning myself to face the person. To avoid going off on mental tangents, I plan on searching the conversation for better quality information through clarifying questions, especially during that lag time between speakers and listeners. To mitigate rebutting consistently, I can ask the talker to clarify, avoid using red flags that negatively affect communications. Now that we've discussed these internal pollutants, let's explore external pollutants. Next slide, please. Not only do I face the internal issues, there's also external pollutants. For me, there are three main areas that are my external noise pollutants. To begin, I agree with Burley Allen that the items on this slide prevent people from listening effectively. I see it every day. For me, I often am interrupted at work by phone calls. My solution is to take calls at a certain time, schedule important conversations on the calendar to avoid time crunches. Another external issue is clock watching. Instead of paying attention to the talker, I watch the clock. My solution, simple: stop wearing a watch, position myself in the workplace so I can't view a clock. I'm also a fidgeter by nature. I play with my cell phone, tap my fingers, and do other things. All of these separate me from the conversation. To help in this area, I plan on maintaining interest in the subject by getting involved, asking questions, and tuning in. Let's now discuss how I can put all these techniques into a plan of action to improve my interpersonal communication skills, especially when there's resistance or conflict, as I achieve my purpose. So what do I plan on doing with the information I've learned in this course? To illustrate this, I see myself making action steps to help me achieve my true purpose in life. I have 4 action steps in 4 categories: God, family, others, and self. To begin, I must learn to communicate as I serve God. This involves opening my heart so I can hear His instructions. I also plan on being a spokesman for Him. Within my family, I'll use the skills learned to become more of an extrovert. Not that I'm going to change overnight, but I need to welcome more people into our home. I will also sustain my communication with my spouse, as I think this is going very well for me. To better serve others, I plan on recognizing the importance of verbal and nonverbal cues, sometimes of which I'm deficient, especially with future clients. Something Hanke stresses that is very important, especially when communicating face-to-face. In the area of self, I plan on learning to recognize the different styles of communication styles so I can learn and apply them to help influence and build better relationships. Finally, I plan on making a concerted effort to focus on others around me and stop doing what I do, which is overanalyzing conversations. This concludes my plan of action. Please go to the next slide for a listing of references for this presentation. These are the references that I used in this presentation. This concludes my presentation. Thank you.